My name's Ron Dusterhoft. I'm actually a mechanical engineer who spent most of my career breaking things. I specialized in fracture mechanics and steel and somehow ended up in hydraulic fracturing and rock. So I try to learn how to break things most effectively, I guess, whereas most of my counterparts try not to break things. So
you have a particular set of skills.
Yeah. Yeah, so I've been working with Halliburton for 36 years. Started in operations, worked in Canada, North Africa, and then Gulf of Mexico for a long, long time. Sand control, high perm fracturing, everything was good. And then I went from Darcy rock to nano-Darcy rock and had to learn how to frack and complete shales. And so this was a big challenge. So some of the stuff I'll show today is really kind of honing in on trying to understand this rock. This rock is different from anything else that we've ever completed in before. And even though we've gotten kind of good at the operational side of things, our level of understanding of the rock itself is still pretty limited. How does fluid flow in a nano-Darcy rock? We still use Darcy's law on every reservoir simulator that we have. So there's things in there that we just haven't picked up yet. So I'll go on, and really what I'm going to talk about is summarized in two papers here. One is both ERTEC papers, both collaborations with certain people at Devon. One in the Barnett Shale, kind of a step out into the oil leg of the Barnett Shale, and another in the marginal region in the Eagleford. All we get to write about is marginal papers, right? Or marginal reservoirs, because the good ones, no one really wants to get into the nuts and bolts and do the science on them anymore. So this was what we were trying to do initially, right? This was an integrated workflow for shale. And you notice the left-hand side of this thing is all geoscience. Everything's geoscience on the left-hand side. And then I'm kind of honing in on a subsurface model, generation 1, I call it. And that's kind of what people hang their hat on. When I go out and buy an asset, that's what I'm hanging my hat on, right? That's what I build my reserves on. That's what I sell myself on. So when I go and say I'm going to have a generation N+1, people don't like that because they don't like writing down reserves. So there was a bit of an argument when we started going into this path, but what you find is that I can get a really good understanding of the subsurface, but how is it going to produce in a shale is a whole different ball of wax. So now I'm looking at what's the optimum well placement within that reservoir, what's the optimum completion design, and then I have to start looking at it, did I really get there? And the answer is usually not. So then there's a whole bunch of validation steps on the back end of this thing. It's stimulation, execution, validation. We do things like microseismic. We have a lot of fiber optics. We have all these things that tell us where we think the fracture is going. And almost every time we do one of those projects, we're surprised. So that gives you a level of understanding of just the lack of understanding that we have in this business yet. So we learn and we apply those learnings, and what we see is those learnings are applied on a reservoir by reservoir, almost region by region. It's even smaller than counties, how fast these things change. So we have to learn and we have to apply. And the only way we can calibrate how well we've learned is through production analytics. And one of the big challenges we face is the industry has kind of focused on IP90. Initial production 90 days is their standard, and they draw a decline curve. The completion engineer is pretty happy. He doesn't want to hear about that well ever again. The drilling engineer doesn't want to hear about it ever again. The production engineer is stuck with it, right? And he has to deal with this for the rest of the life of the well. And what we really find is a lot of the changes we make in terms of getting better reservoir quality rock, we're actually working 6, 8, 10 months out where we actually change the decline curve more than we are the IP90. So that's where we're starting to see some of the value. And we'll look a little bit at some of this stuff. So this is looking at it's the grasslands area in the Barnett. It's the marginal play, but it's the oil leg in the Barnett. You see the areas outlined in the lower part of that up above here. Those are, I'm kind of afraid to use the mouse here, but yeah. So in this area here, this is a core gas in here, and then this is more of a condensate-rich area of the Barnett. So when we move into the grasslands, we're kind of stepping out. It's like Pioneer is saying at the time, this would have been an exploration play, but Devon, when they went in here, they decided, you know, we're just going to take everything we know about the Barnett and the gas, and we're going to take here and we're just going to do the same thing. And they drilled 11 wells, and they had one good well. So that's less than 10% success rate. That's not very efficient. So the challenge was, what do we do? And no one knew. We didn't have any reservoir information because we didn't get a pilot hole. We didn't get good enough information. They did have 3D seismic. So we decided we would do some reservoir work in this case. And this involved, we had about 7 vertical log penetrations. We did have some 3D seismic here. So 7 logs and 3D seismic. That's what we used to build this model. And this model turned out to be quite valuable. Not only, you can see kind of the area where we had the seismic here. And then you can also see the slices. And when we do the slices, you can look at slices on effective porosity. You can do water saturation. You can do brittleness, which was a big thing at the time. And then we had something called a quality index. Well, okay, what's a quality index, right? This is how I can look at a specific region and try to define my reservoir quality. You know, hindsight, in this particular reservoir, what that quality index was effective porosity coupled with mechanical properties. So what we found was we had to be in the more porous rock and the stiffer rock. And what they had targeted initially was actually a high TOC section, fairly high in the Barnett, that was soft. So it had low effective porosity and it was a soft rock. And if you look at, this was one of the first wells they drilled, and this is actually drilled well, you know, it's just drilled well in the wrong rock. And that green area up there and the blue area you see above is actually softer rock. And this is the quality index mapped out. So what you see is that red section near the bottom of that, below that well up here, this is actually the best quality rock within this area. And we were above it, you know, you're above it about 50 feet. So the logical explanation here is fracturing is the way to cure poor well placement, right? I can get my fracs to go 50 feet up or down. And so we fracked these wells and we pumped millions of pounds of sand in these wells, millions of gallons of water. And we got almost nothing out of this well. We got a tiny bit of gas, but almost nothing. So to model this from a production perspective, doing production history matching, we had to damage our fracture conductivity by 97%. So that's telling us there's no fractures down there. But I know I placed the sand. I know I pumped the water, but I'm not seeing any fractures. That's what it's telling me. So this was a bizarre finding for us. So we start looking at it, and well, I can have complex vertical geometry, but now I'm in a soft rock. My wellbore's in a soft rock. And if these wells don't produce very well, what's the first thing they do on the production side? They draw them down extensively. So you pull as hard as you can, trying to get the fluid to come out. And when you do that, you happen to maximize the stress at the wellbore. When I maximize the stress at the wellbore, I may be healing a lot of these fractures. I'm losing my near wellbore connection to the reservoir, and I end up with low productivity. So that's one story. There's probably many more stories you can get, but I'm going to stick with that one for this play. So they had a good well. They got it by accident, is what we found out. When we put the map in, put this well into the subsurface model, the last third of these wells this well was in good rock. And this was a relatively good well. The first part of this well was a disaster around the heel where they kicked off, but that was where they were trying to kick off, was in the TLC rich shale. So this was interesting. You can look at the mud logs on there too, because what you noticed, and this was an interesting validation for us, when we got into the better quality reservoir, we started to see good mud log shows right away. So that was an indicator that, yeah, we're probably on the right track. We got some porosity, we got some permeability, and lo and behold, we got some better wells. So what this really pointed us to was dropping the landing zone and actually starting to do some geosteering. This one, we tried to stay in zone. As you can tell from the subsurface model, we're in a better place. We're still not in the ideal place all the way through the well. But from the mud logs and the surface data logging, I now have good shows along the entire well. This is a much better well than what we had before. This is from a geosteering perspective, this was pretty easy, right? I got my high TOC rich shale on top. I just need to stay out of it. So it's relatively easy to see that and to stay below it. The problem was when we started dropping the zone, everyone's an experimentalist. We got to drop a little lower and see if that works, right? So we had a couple accidents going too low as well. Now, this is the drilling crowd. This is some reservoir stuff. Apologize. But it's important stuff. The upper curve here, 3 curves. The black curve on the upper, I'll say this one here would be, whoops, no planar fractures, or no natural fractures, just a planar frac leading away from the wellbore. Pardon me. The red curve would be a natural fracture every 200 feet. And then the green curve would be a natural fracture every 100 feet. So what it's telling you is that surface area really matters. That's kind of the thing here, right? And we'll come back to this in a little bit because it's telling me something else that we didn't really realize at the time. The bottom curve is really just the number of fractures. And if you look at the black one, 37 fractures, the next one's 19, 13, and 10. As the production goes down, this tells us more fractures better. More fractures are going to work better, which is now today kind of common knowledge in the industry. At the time, this was not. This was pretty new stuff at the time. So, okay, we put more staging, more clusters in, and but then what do I do about this other thing, right? What do I do about the natural fracture thing? What is that telling me? So we went in and did a pretty detailed reservoir simulation. At this time, this was a kind of leading edge. And then you look at the gas production. This is what I expect to see. You get natural fractures contributing. I expect to see about a 15% increase in production. And then you look at the oil production, and it's the same curve I showed you before. What this is really showing you is that by stimulating the secondary porosity or the natural fractures, I'm doubling my oil production in over the life of this well. That kind of slid off the table. No one was paying attention to this. I'm saying, no, we got to look at this. This is telling us something, right? This is important. Why is this? Turns out that this is really a retrograde condensate reservoir. That's what this is really telling us. But there's a couple of things here that are really important. The surface area that we're connected to in this reservoir has a huge impact on production performance. So the fractures, can I stimulate secondary porosity, which would be natural fractures? Anything I can do to maximize that connected area is going to have a huge impact on well performance. If I fail to do that, I fail to take advantage of what's down there. So this led us down a path of changing a lot of things we did. First thing we did, we put more perf clusters in. Now, this is after I dropped the well. I actually had to get the well in the right place first to make this happen. And then we actually dropped the slurry rate. We looked at changing the job from larger proppant to smaller proppant, which the industry has done that tremendously since this point. And the reason is to try to get the proppant further out and to try to stimulate some of the secondary porosity. And I guess the big takeaway here is we made a bunch of changes to the well placement. We made a bunch of changes to the design. And this is what happened in this project. The far left is pre-project. So I had one good well. I had arguably 4 mediocre wells. I had 4 really, really bad wells. And really bad wells here cost a lot of money. And if they don't make any production back, that's a big drain on the whole project, right? So the question was, what can I do to get rid of those? So adjusted well placement. So those 5 wells there with the yellow eggs over top of them, we have reasons for that. It was, we dropped, you know, one was we kicked off early, we only hit a third, and then we got playing and getting close to the Ellenberger, and we watered some wells out. So we got too close to the water. But when we refined our well placement, really the primary thing here was once we refined our well placement, almost all of the wells, these are all normalized to the best pre-project well for estimated ultimate recovery. So 1 is the best pre-project well. And what you notice is almost all the wells, after we get the wells in the right place, exceed the best pre-project well. And the last 3 wells were the ones that we implemented our completions on. And you can look, you know, I guess what I did here is I threw this in here just because, yeah, you know, the best pre-project well, it took 2 years to get to the same cume that our latest wells are getting to in 4 months in terms of oil. So we're dramatically improving the liquids productivity. So how did this all happen, right?
Ron, what was the impact on the overall financial performance of the wells? Because, I mean, obviously you're getting a lot of money up front and so forth, but
so this was interesting, right? Because we had to do the science up front, we had to do the extra work. And what we found was when we were drilling those wells in that soft shale, we had to pull casing 2 or 3 times on 2 or 3 different wells just because we weren't getting the bottom. We had to go run another wiper trip and get in. Once we placed it in the more competent rock, those costs went away. We actually ran a vertical pilot. We got good logs. We refined our modeling, and that cost is built in. And what you find is that post-project, the well per well costs were actually cheaper, even after all the frac changes and everything. The post-project wells were actually cheaper than the pre-project wells. And that includes the pilot hole and everything into these wells. So
fancier wells, but they ended up costing less.
They end up costing less, and they're not necessarily fancy. They're just, I just know more. I know more, so I make better decisions. And it takes me less time to make these decisions, right? So the point I really want to make here, and I think we're kind of hitting on it, but it's, you know, we can talk about communication as being a critical component. But what we're missing more than anything is collaboration. And I can't get my drilling engineer and my geoscientist and my completion engineer very rarely in the same room. And if I get them in the same room, they don't want to talk to each other. They just kind of point their fingers at each other, right? So the interesting thing here with Devin, I found out the best way to get collaboration was to have a geoscientist who was a lineman on the college football team. He's just a big guy, you know, and nice guy, but boy, everyone respected him because he's a big guy. And so that was one way to pull it together. But what we found was, you know, what we could do is when we brought things into that Earth model environment, we could get people to talk. The geoscientists would start talking, the drillers would start talking, and the completions engineers and even the production engineers would start talking. And we were able to get decisions on well placement made and targets made by just getting that environment and getting people talking. And so that was a big step. The problem with this whole workflow was that it takes about 3 months to put that Earth model together. And in this business today, we just don't have that much time. So the question became, how can I take this learning and try to speed things up? You know, try to make it work so I can get it kind of make it practical from an operator's perspective as well as from a service provider perspective. So we'll look at this Eagleford study, and this was another attempt, and I won't say that we're successful with this because we got a couple really good cases with Devon. We've taken this to 2 or 3 other clients, but if you look at the total amount that we do this kind of work and our total work that we do, it's probably less than 2 or 3%. So yeah, we can demonstrate the effect, but have we commercialized it effectively? The answer is no, not yet. So I see this meeting today as being a big step to get the drilling community talking with the geoscience community, talking with the completions community. So this is Lavaca County. It's one of the really crappy areas in the Eagleford where they're pinching out, and you don't have as much thickness. It's more volatile oil, which, you know, it's harder to produce and harder to drill. So that makes it a bit of a challenge to look at. They did a whole bunch of type curve analysis on existing wells in the area, and there were, you know, 200 or quite a few wells here. Have to look at the number of so we had a lot of wells to work with, get a good idea of what our expectations for production should be. But what can we do to understand this better? So you look at this, there's 3 wells in this study. We'll call them A, B, and C. And the Eagleford thickness is actually pretty thin. It's going from 45 feet to about 20 feet in well C. And we're stuck trying to drill this, and this is actually a very challenging environment for all around, from a geoscience perspective, a drilling perspective, as well as a completion perspective. So you look at the standard directional drilling plot. This is what you tend to see from a completions perspective. This does nothing for me, right? It gives me a broad facies, but I know I probably have a whole bunch of layers within each one of those bigger layers. And this kind of shows the well looks pretty good, right? And then go on. So this is well A, toe down. Well B, toe up. Again, this one doesn't look all that bad. It's mostly looks like it's in zone. And then well C, this doesn't look too good, right? And one thing to note here, just that pepper shale that's kind of in blue, and that's a bad place to be in the Eagleford, right? You can't break them down. It's a struggle. But there's a transition zone just above that that's also a bad place to be. So what you notice here, they broke it up into several areas. And you notice here, it looks where the, well, it looks like we're in a good place. Stages were unsuccessful. We skipped the toe completely because we're out of zone. And then you look at half stages because, well, we're kind of in an okay place, but we're really trying to make the best out of a bad situation here. So what we ended up doing was moving this into a different environment, right? Yeah. So remember what I said about the Earth model environment and getting people to talk. What we have here is a combination of, on the bottom, it's a geosteering type tool coupled. And then what we have is we have some petrophysical tools above that. And then kind of at the top of this thing, we have 2 things. One is a production index, which is kind of like a quality index based on productivity. And next is what we call a frac index, which is all about mechanical properties. So what it's telling us now is the well in good rock, bad rock, or really crappy rock. And it allows us to think on the very top, look at different stage scenarios. And in this case, this is well B, we went from 31 to 19 stages, just based on the rock quality. The interesting thing about this, though, is that now I've got an environment again. This is an environment where I can get my geoscientists talking to my drilling people, talking to my completion people. So we can all get on one page. That doesn't happen very often. So this is actually a really nice layout. So it's a kind of a modification, but it allows us to collaborate a lot more. And it allows you, it's always post-mortem, right? When we're dealing with stuff, we're always dealing with the well that's delivered to us. But even post-mortem now, I can start working with my driller to do a better job on the next well at least, right? And understanding what the limitations are with this one. And if the drillers understand what the problems are, you have a much better chance of correcting that going forward. So we eliminated 12 stages from this well.
Ron, would it be possible to move that into a real-time environment? I mean, you've got a good display here.
Yeah.
And understanding some of the information is post-well, but would there be enough to give you at least a rock quality index?
Yeah, that's actually quite doable. The only, I would leave the staging till after I'm done.
Correct.
But I can do everything else in real time.
Right.
If I have, so the problem that we run into in shale is I don't often have good log data. But if I have a good vertical correlation and I have either a spectral gamma and a density, then I get some real-time data, I can start doing this in real time.
Real-time spectral gamma and real-time?
If you have it, yeah. The challenge, you know, as well as I do, is that no one runs expensive LWD tools in shale. So I don't get what I want in good enough quality. So I could do it in real time, but it's not happening today. And to be honest, if I have this spectral gamma and density, I can do this. And a lot of this stuff that we did here, we ran pulse neutrons in the case hole, and then we are able to do a better log correlation. If I run a few pulse neutrons in the case hole, then I can do a better job in the future for me on my analysis with the spectral gamma and the density, right? It's all about training your neural networks to do your modeling on the logs.
Pay attention to the next presentation.
Cool. So this is a nice environment. B, we skipped 12 stages. Well, C was pretty much a disaster from a drilling perspective, but again, don't think bad on the drilling. This was a hard well to drill. We were the Eagleford was almost non-existent here. The big thing that we can claim here is that we didn't spend a whole bunch of money on a bad well. We saved a bunch of money, and we didn't spend it on this well because we realized that we're mostly out of zone. We're in bad rock. We did 12 stages, and we would have been planned somewhere around 25 stages. So we cut the number of stages in half. How did these wells perform? Here's what we did initially. So to look at what I got here, because I'm always bad about putting stuff in and not knowing what's in there. So number of stages. Well, A was done geometrically, right? 25 stages based on length. 6 clusters per stage, 36 per clusters. The proppant mass per gross perforated interval, you can see on over here. And you can see we went down, and the crappier well, we pumped less, and then the better wells we pumped more.
That's a technical term.
Yeah. And same with the total fluid. So we pumped less volume into the poorer wells. And that's by design in this case. Normally, if you want to get more out of a bad well, you pump bigger jobs, but you know, if you're fighting economics, at this point of no return on that, right? So, so the number of stages went from 25 to 19 on well B. Both A and B were both drilled fairly well in this field, and then down to 12 on well C. How did they perform? Turns out well B is actually the best of these 3 wells. That's the one with the 19 stages. Well A both of those wells were pretty good wells in this area. Well C was not a good well. We knew that going in, so our expectations weren't, we didn't exceed expectations on well C. The nice thing about well C is we didn't spend near as much money on well C, so it looked a whole lot better. This is cum gas. that was cum oil before. So well B outperformed well A significantly more on gas. Well C made a little bit more gas than it did oil, to be expected. And then BOE, again, well B comes out on top. Well, it's interesting because well B had 19 stages, well A had 25. Number of stages doesn't matter here. It's the quality of the rock that you're in that really drove the productivity of these wells and the performance. So the question was, well, what would we do on well A after all of this, right? So we went in and did the analysis on well A, and we showed that we would be somewhere around 16 stages. We would have taken out nine frac stages, which is a significant chunk of change. When it comes to your net present value, that's going to have a huge impact on your net present value for that well. And based on what we saw in well B, we felt we would not see any reduced productivity by doing that. So, you know, this was where we talk about and why. You know, I should be getting good fracture connectivity, good fracture height. Why am I not seeing the production from these zones when I'm not in zone, right? So we go back here and we can look at these, but you know, from a mechanical perspective, what's going on? One, I can have the soft rock and I can lose my near wellbore conductivity if I'm in a soft rock. So if I'm in a soft rock, I can explain the loss of near wellbore conductivity and connectivity. If I'm in a fairly good rock or a fairly hard rock and I'm still not getting the communication, what is going on? And, you know, so am I seeing shear failure? Am I seeing bedding failure and complex geometry or complex vertical geometry? Because we always assume that these fractures are vertical and they're straight. When you look at a shale and you see all the bedding planes that we're fracking through, there's really no reason to expect that I should see a nice vertical fracture in these reservoirs. And so some of the stuff that you look at are some of these major layers or major bedding planes that we're seeing. If they shift in shear at all, that can terminate the vertical growth, and then I can redirect my fracture. I can do all kinds of different things. The problem that we have is that you can model things, you can show things, but we can't actually see that anywhere unless we do it in the laboratory, right? And arguably, we've done a lot of work in the laboratory years gone by. We don't see a lot of work in layered rock because it's hard to get. But we have done some interesting stuff just recently, and I think we're trying to get my dates right? Okay, we're going to be presenting some stuff at the Perforating Forum at Galveston coming up. And, you know, you think very many people have gotten shale targets to do perforating tests in? Not too many. So all the perforating charge data we see are for standard sandstone and standard carbonate type rocks. We got some Eagleford targets. We ran 23-gram charges. And any guesses on how deep the penetrations were?
3 inches.
You know, you expect to see about 18 inches of penetration in a conventional rock. The penetration in the shale is about 3 inches. And this was consistent over 8 shots. And under stress, in situ type conditions. So what that's telling us is that these rocks are failing differently than what we had predicted. They're failing in fracture mode. They're not failing in compaction. There's no compaction. That also tells us that there's a lot more stress interference than what we probably initially thought, and a lot more near wellbore complexity than what we initially thought, because we're altering the stresses in the near wellbore. So there's a lot of things at play here from the fracture mechanics perspective. And there's a lot we don't know, but one thing we do know is that we can do a better job when the well is placed in the best rock. And I think that's what we showed here. Go down here, because now we'll look at this and say, if we would have done A using this approach, we would have been down to 16 stages. The cost would have dropped $1.1 million on that well, or 30% reduction in cost. What you really notice on well C here is we went from a projected cost of 2.7 million, which they would have sunk into that poor hole, to 1.8. So we saved almost $1 million on that one. And on well B, we still got good productivity, but we saved in excess of $1 million on well B. So as a result, your economics has a huge impact on economics. And say the geoengineered stimulation for well B reduces cost by 45%. And that's substantial, and it didn't damage the productivity. We could have cut the cost of well A by 35% and not damage the productivity. So overall conclusions here.
You're right on top.
Yeah. The well placement can have a profound impact on fracture performance and well productivity. The exact causes for that, we could have put some animations in here, but I was thinking on a virtual meeting, it's not a good idea. So, but there's lots of reasons why that might be. And to be honest, the reasons are going to be specific to where you're working, because I'm dealing with different characteristics and different changes in rock everywhere I go. And if I got the right layer, or I call them geohazards, if it's a soft layer, anywhere in there, that can terminate my fracture, my vertical fracture growth, and cause a change in direction, which after that, I don't see the fracture. I know I'm pumping a whole lot into it, I just don't see it. We tend to see very few wells today when correlated or stay within zone. I saw one yesterday, I almost dropped out of my chair because we were working on one in the Bakken on a project, and they decided to use a new tool. And we saw 3 wells that were all over the place and one that was straight. And I said, wow, give us a break, because we did all the fiber on the straight well. I said, well, that's not representative of what we're doing. So it's just like, but you know, you run into that. You just don't see it very often. And in lots of cases, the money saved from omitting portions of the well can be significant. But the thing that we're not paying attention to is how much more could I get out of that well if I had my well in the right place. You know, well, arguably well A and B could be 30 to 40% better wells. And that's not, you know, when you do the engineered completion, it's how much can I save, it's not how much can I make. And this is the change of mindset we have to get to. And that's about what I have. Yeah.
What kind of new tool?
Just a rotary steerable. And that's all I can answer, because I don't know the new rotary steerable. I don't know enough about what they did. Yeah, it was yesterday, so I'll find out. Yeah.
Hey, you showed some great examples where you save costs, where you improve MPV, improve production. How did you get paid? Was it like drilling at a day rate, fracking at an hour pump? How were you paid? And if the answer is yes, like, how can you really improve the collaboration by collaborating with your?
So I have a funny story, right? When we did those 3 wells in the Eagleford, I had to go talk to our regional manager and tell him that we were eliminating 12 stages from this well. That did not go well. That did not go well, right? That was like one of the hardest conversations I've had in my career. 36 years with Halliburton, and that was probably one of the worst points in my whole career, was telling him that we're eliminating 12 stages, because the VP at Devon called him up and was laughing at him because we're taking 12 stages out of the well. Said, what are you guys doing, you know? And I'm sitting there and said, we're making better wells. And he didn't, of course, he didn't care. He was focused on Halliburton's bottom line. This is the kind of issues that we get into here. And from our standpoint, the biggest issue for us is if we make better wells, we improve the economics of the whole project. So our goal is to keep working. And we are paid by the stage, by what we do. We will do certain services that we charge for, but most of the stuff that we do will be hidden in the cost. And it makes it hard because people don't want to pay for anything right now, anything extra.
So all the research and stuff that went into this, the team's time was not a consulting project. Like you.
That is correct. So there's a lot of work went into these things, right? And
yeah, you showed some cost, but overall cost savings on a per stage basis.
Yeah. So the goal has to be
massive,
minimize our cost. Yeah.
There wasn't a massive consulting project time that went into that.
On the second one, definitely not. On the first one, we had about 4 people that we assigned full time for 3 months. So that was covered up because it was a proof of concept. But the second one, we got to a point where, and this is the point I was saying, we can't afford to do that whole workflow. That's what we found. So how do you shave that down to the point where you can make it still valuable? Yeah, so that environment with the petrophysics and the geosteering was a good way to shave off a lot of the cost.
I'm actually going to address that in the wrap-up session as well.
Okay.
Your first project was very interesting. You had like 30+ wells, first 1/3 or so, not very good wells, and you started improving in the second third. In the third group of wells, you had like the best performance. So your biggest NPV would be tools that last 1/3 forward in time.
Yeah.
Do you have thoughts on like your commercial arrangements, like how to collaborate with your customer in order to minimize that learning time? I mean, you increase at a magnitude your problem loading. Yes.
So you're talking to a scientist and not a salesman, right? I'm a technology fellow, and but the answer to that is yeah, we do. But then you have to look. You know, Devon was a very good partner for us. And what did Devon do after we did this? Right? They restructured their company to do this and kind of pushed us out. So in that respect, it was a from a service company perspective, it was a failure. But we learned a lot that we can take forward. But this is the kind of stuff that we deal with. It's a challenging environment. There's no question of that. And how do we get more collaboration? How do we get better relationships? Maybe this downturn will help us.
That would probably be a 3-day conference, all that.
Well, they let you as long as it was free.
Right. Yeah. I agree. We're getting into some testy stuff here, right? That's tough, man. It's tough to deal with. But very good points. It's hard to do this kind of work, and you know, it's hard for us as a fairly large service company to do this kind of work. For a small service company, it's almost impossible. So you have to, you have to get into kind of a collaborative environment where we have to be involved with the geoscientists. We need to be involved with the drilling, but in a lot of places that doesn't happen. So then you start looking at who are the clients that you can work for that will do this. That's where you can make it work. All right.
Very good, Ron. Thank you.
Thank you.